Hello and welcome to Reinventing Nerds. Today we have actually a very special guest. I know I say a lot of my guests are special, but today is extra special because Franklin Taggart, he was the first guest on the Reinventing Nerds podcast, and he supported me through figuring out how to create one and how to get it started and all of that. Franklin's a good friend and an incredible consultant. We'll hear about what he's doing lately. His current focus seems to be about supporting people who work alone. And, I know a lot of nerds work alone, and it seemed like a good idea to learn more about what kind of support is out there for people who are working alone. So it is my great honor to give a warm welcome back to Franklin. Welcome back to the show.
Hooray. How many years is this now, Joanie? Is it two now? You've been
Yeah,
doing this?
it's a couple of years, at least a couple of years now. Yeah, I've been going strong, keeping it up. So thanks to you and the
Flying by.
inspiration. Yeah. So,
Well, I'm
so
delighted to be back. Thank you.
oh, great. Thank you for being here. So, the first time we actually talked, you talked about being a creative nerd who
Hmm.
helps introverted people be more visible,
Yes.
right? And since then, you've shifted a little bit. I mean, it sounds like somewhat similar, but you're supporting people who work alone. So, first of all, let's get started. What inspired you to do this?
Well, there were several things that were a part of it, and one of them is that most of the people that I've worked with over the years are people who work alone. And one of the things that I started to see was just kind of a series of patterns with
Mm-hmm.
them that were kind of unique challenges that were related to working alone. And we'll talk more in detail about some of those challenges here a little bit later. But I started to notice that these patterns were happening, and I thought, wow, not only that, I saw that I had a lot of the same challenges. I've always loved working alone, and I think the times that I've been happiest in my career were the times when I had a door to close and lots of time to think and lots of time to work things out and be creative. And I finally decided, to own that and
Mm-hmm.
really started to look at it from that angle. It's like there are a lot of challenges that come from just being the person who doesn't want to have a big organization to manage and not even necessarily to have other people to answer to. So that's kind of what inspired it. I was really my own desires were in that direction, and most of the people that I work with are also in that situation.
Well, that's really interesting because, I mean, first of all, I can already tell that some of the nerds on the other end of this podcast are leaders, and they're going, "Gosh, what I would do for a day of alone time just to create, right, and to not be bothered to shut the door."
Yeah,
So certainly, there's some of that, but then some of them I even realize. Like you, like, wow, I'm thinking I should be a leader because that's the way to go. But really, I don't want to. What are the other options? So I'm really glad you're here to talk about that.
yeah, I'm happy to.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you first of all,
Hmm.
um, because you talk about you work with introverts a lot. I mean, are people who work alone typically introverts, or do they need to be, or what kind of things have you seen around that?
Well, I'd say that the majority of people that I've worked with they would identify as introverts.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I always say introvert doesn't mean shy. Introvert just means simply that,
Mm-hmm.
you prefer environments where there's not a whole lot of sensory stimulation, and you appreciate the quiet. It's not that you don't like people. It's just that you have a level of tolerance for social situations that are noisy and a lot of movement. So I do work with a lot of people who actually prefer kind of a slow pace, quiet space, and they're looking for, you know, they're looking for the room that they can have with their kind of inner thoughts, so that they can process the things that are going on inside of them more than all of the external stuff that's going on.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, in psychological terms, we often talk about introverts as getting their energy from within,
Yeah,
and extroverts getting their energy from without, outside, right? Outside,
yeah,
not inside. And so it's not that a negative way of putting it, like, oh, we don't like people. It's more like, actually, my energy comes from my thoughts and my inner world, even though I
Yeah.
still enjoy, especially, maybe even a smaller environments with others, but doesn't mean I can't be with others. But it means that my energy is really coming from the thoughts and the creative or whatever it is that inspires you.
Yeah, for me, I don't even know that it's about that it's coming from my thoughts as much as it's coming from having the room to let down
Ah,
and kind of not think for a while. And that's actually where I get the best inspiration is
hmm.
when my thinking becomes quieter
Mm-hmm.
and a little bit more still. Then all of a sudden the floodgates tend to open. So it's more the letdown that actually helps me to energize than it is the being alone. It's just not having any kind of a demand on my attention
Right.
is a helpful thing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, who are your typical clients? I mean, you keep talking about folks who are in this world. You know, what are they doing? Are they like remote workers in companies, or are they
Yeah,
solopreneurs or something else?
I have. It's an interesting mix. I started out working mostly with artists and authors,
Mm-hmm.
and a few musicians because I was a musician myself. And what really became interesting to me over the last few years, in 2018, I started working with the local small business development center. And they initially hired me to work with creative people, but ultimately what they found was that people needed to come and talk with me more about, you know, starting a business on your
Mm-hmm.
own and doing marketing when you're a one person business. And like I did a lot of marketing work with people who were in their business for the first time. So that opened my doors to people in a lot of different areas. And I would say that the majority of folks that I work with are in professional services like coaching and consulting.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a lot of people who are freelancers. I've got a bunch of people who are doing things like technical writing, um, editing, different kinds of freelance offerings. I've got a couple of people that are like technical illustrators and people who are in those kinds of roles. And they're like I said, they're not really interested in working as an employee for a corporation, but they are interested in offering their services to corporate situations.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been all over the map. I've got several people that are therapists who are kind of shifting over into coaching, and I've got other folks yet that are, you know, business people that want to write a book, and then I've
Mm-hmm.
got people who are, I've got like people who are in their late 60s and early 70s who want to start a YouTube channel.
Oh, fun. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's all over the map,
Mm-hmm.
but I love the variety, and the thing that we all have in common is that we all have a one person business, and we all want to kind of keep it that way, and we also want it to be a sustainable business.
That makes a real opportunity here for the nerds. If we've got a niche of people who are nerds working alone, they don't
Yeah,
have to hang out with other nerds necessarily to find their tribe. Could be artists or therapists or
yeah,
60-year-old somethings who are creating a YouTube channel. Could be anyone, right?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so what kinds of challenges do they run into? I mean, I'm thinking that some of them are around solopreneur and marketing, being everything, right? That's
Yeah.
always one. But what might be some other unique challenges that people working alone might run into?
Oh, wearing all the hats is definitely the
Mm,
biggest of all of them, and I think it's the most common. You're responsible for everything,
mm-hmm,
and I think one of the things that's tricky for people who want to have kind of a one person business is that a lot of times they have difficulty letting go of things that they could actually hire out.
yes.
Like we have a difficult time,
Mm,
letting other people be creative on our behalf, or we have a difficult
mm,
time letting other people do work for us, like maybe hiring somebody to do our email marketing or somebody to do our social media or things like that. And I think part of it is that we've gotten in the habit of doing everything.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also one of the difficulties when you're hiring things out or when you're trying to automate things is that there's a learning curve, and there's also there's there's an adjustment period. Like, it's hard to let somebody else take over something that I've been doing now for the last bunch of years. Like, it's really hard for me to let go of some of me doing my own email
Mm-hmm.
marketing and
Mm-hmm.
letting somebody else take that on who's actually a specialist in it. And part of it is because I've gotten in the habit of doing it.
Right.
You know, it's like getting
Mm-hmm.
adjusted to not having that anymore. There's a weird kind of an adjustment period that happens.
Mm-hmm. I
And
hear
I think,
this. Yeah. I
go
hear this a
ahead.
lot. I hear this a lot with nerds, and it's about like coding and stuff. All of a
Oh,
sudden,
yeah.
and then perhaps sort of not feeling, well, they have the control, but also shifting their focus to do something else.
Oh, yeah.
But what you said about having this period of adjustment, that's huge. Like allowing yourself to feel uncomfortable for a while or make mistakes, perhaps.
Allowing it or not, it's like you are going to feel uncomfortable for a
Yeah.
while. And, you know, you do ultimately find your way through that. But um, wearing all the hats is definitely the top of the list as far as the challenges are concerned. And when it comes to administrative work, especially, that's the one that for a lot of folks is the real challenge, because that's the one that they tend to procrastinate most on. So
Yeah, I can relate to that.
you know that one. Yeah. Well, I actually that's one of my big ones too personally,
Mm-hmm.
is that I put the administrative work off until it has to be done. And I
Right.
don't have a real good system in place for doing it. So it's like I'm recreating the wheel every time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something I have to learn. There's my
Mm-hmm.
learning curve, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when you're working alone, there's more of that. Even if you are freelancing, you still have to keep track of probably your hours, your billing,
Yeah.
all sorts of stuff. Yeah, among other things.
The good news
Yeah.
is that there's a lot of software solutions these days
Mm-hmm.
for everything like that, if you have the patience to find them and learn how to use them.
Mm-hmm.
Like contact management, there are 150 different options right now, and they're all good. You just kind of have to find the one that fits your system and fits your style, and that takes time. It's not necessarily always a cut and dry, solution that you
Mm-hmm.
can say, "Oh yeah, this is definitely for me." And but as long as you have the patience and the learning curve, there are good software solutions out for a lot of what we do. I'm really actually encouraged and excited about that, because it is making my life a little bit easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, let me ask you about one other challenge that comes to mind, especially from the psychological perspective here.
Yeah,
And working alone, I mean, we've had this come up a lot over the last year and a half with the pandemic, this issue of people being alone at home and concerns about social isolation and the
yeah.
toll it takes on people. And now we have people who want to work alone who are at home. What kind of risks are there for becoming isolated, or you know, do you see that come up in your work?
Frequently,
Mm.
that is something that comes up often. I find that people who are people who prefer working alone still need human contact.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're not built for complete isolation all the time. And even though we've got these wonderful tools like Zoom, where we can actually have good conversations with people and have moments of interaction, it's not the same as being in proximity to another human. And I was telling you this morning in our group meeting that my son is 15 years old, and he's really struggling this summer because he got used to, when school was back in session, he got used to being around kids all the time. And now this summer, he's not able to be around them as much, and it's really wearing on him. Now,
Yeah.
my son is an online gamer, so he's constantly in contact with other people through his games and through his phone, but it's not enough. it doesn't satisfy the social needs that he has, as well as being around other people. And I think that there's a risk for people who work alone to go into what some people would categorize as touch starvation,
Mm-hmm.
where we don't have enough direct human contact. And it does play on us psychologically. I think one of the things that feeds anxiety and depression more often than not is isolation and disconnection from other humans. I think that those are two of the big feeders for anxiety and depression that we don't take seriously enough. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that is something that people who prefer working alone are challenged with. Um, I have to I have to kind of force myself to put on clothes and leave the house sometimes. You know?
Yeah, do what's good for you, whether you want to or not. Or not. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, luckily, I've got a couple of situations that require me to do that,
Mm-hmm.
and they're important to me. I mean, they're really good social outlets, and being able to go to the business development center once a week
Mm-hmm.
and be around other people in that context is a really helpful thing. And I also, I feel lucky that I have a close family, and we enjoy doing things together. Even if it's just like watching a movie
Mm-hmm.
together and being in the same room, I feel lucky to have that in place for myself. But so finding the balance between solitude and legitimate connection is a challenge for me and for a lot of folks.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And sometimes, we just get so wrapped up in what we're doing, we don't notice the signs that are there.
Yeah,
And you're like making, I don't know, setting your alarm or something or having a place to be to force you to do it, even if you're not acknowledging it immediately until it's too late. It sounds like a
yeah.
great idea. Mm.
Having a dog that needs a walk three
Yeah,
times a day is really good.
that's a good one.
He comes and lets me know that it's time.
Uh-huh. Well, you also have a community, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you have established a community of people who work alone, which is kind of interesting, right? I mean, it sort of seems like,
Yeah,
counterintuitive. So tell me about that. What does that mean?
it's a fairly new community, and it's really, in my opinion, it might be too soon to tell whether it's going to take off or not,
Mm-hmm.
because the level of interaction in there is what you would expect from a group of introverts. And a lot of times, I feel like I'm the only one in there that's saying anything. But it's a brand new community, and it's kind of in conjunction with the podcast that I started called Your Own Best Company. And I'm growing it slowly. I don't want to do this mass invitation, so I'm growing it only a few members at a time, and trying to get quality conversations started in that room. By and large, the people that are there have shown a lot of appreciation for it, and I'm hoping that it'll become a place where participation, increases as people see the importance and value of it.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned the group that you and I, meet in once a week. It's just three of us, but that's become kind of an essential part of my weekly mix. And the interactions that we have there are really good. They can go anywhere and they can be about anything, but it's the connection that really makes the difference. It matters, right?
Yeah.
And what I'd like to have is for my online group, for the Facebook group, to be that kind of quality. And it's kind of where I'm shooting for.
Yeah. That
Getting
make
back to your question, though.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense that finding that there are others out there and maybe even sharing challenges and
Yeah.
successes, tips, tools, resources. I don't know. Do people do that? Or, I mean, that was sort of leading into my next question. Like, what kind of resources are there out there for people who work alone?
Well, it's interesting that you say that. There are some resources that are out there. And actually, one of those resources is one that I recommend to a lot of people. There's a fellow named Paul Jarvis who wrote a great book a couple of years ago called A
Mm-hmm.
Company of One.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the books that really that kind of stopped me in my tracks and said, hey, this is really possible. This is something that I don't have to feel the pressure of building an organization. I don't need to feel the pressure to have a team. I can literally start a business just by myself, and it can be enough. So that book, A Company of One, was one that I really found a lot of affirmation in and confirmation. And Paul Jarvis has a couple of podcasts, one for freelancers. I'm going to have to remember what the names of them are, but if you just look up Paul Jarvis
Yeah.
in your podcast search, you'll find, I think he's got 2 or 3 of them now. But that was one resource that I found that was really good. There are a ton of resources for freelancers in every field.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I pay attention to the ones that tend to be around things like marketing and copywriting, and there are a bunch of podcasts for technical writers and things like that. So the resources are out there. I think a lot of them are industry specific, but they're out there, and they'll help you kind of figure out what you need to do to have the kind of business that you want. But
Mm-hmm.
as far as the need for community, humans are wired for community, even the most introverted of us, and we do need to have connections with each other. And what I wanted to provide in the Facebook group was an easy way for some of that to happen. I wanted it to be easily accessible. I wanted it to be a place where people can come, and that's the sole, interest is the one thing that connects us all is that
Mm-hmm.
we all work alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. I mean, yeah, you keep saying this idea that we are wired to be social beings, and
Mm-hmm.
certainly we've evolved as such. I mean, it used to be if you were outcast from the group that you were in, I mean, that just meant death, right? I mean, if lions and tigers are coming at you, or if you need food, you need to be with other humans to survive. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's similar today. I mean, we need others to survive physically, just to have, shelter and stuff. I mean, I have to call the plumber when the pipes burst because I don't know how to do it,
Yeah.
right? But psychologically too. I mean, the touch factor, the being with others. You were talking about your son. My daughter was talking a while back, and she was in high school, about how they like to all just dogpile on the couch and watch a movie. You
Yeah.
see them in the living room, like they're all touching. I mean, not in any
Yeah.
weird way, but just a leg over somebody else's leg. They're just like, you
Just being
know,
connected, right?
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that's an important thing for all of us, no matter what. The other thing that's really interesting is like in tribal cultures, the person who's the shaman very often is a person who's not in the day to day mix with people. They kind of stay on the
Mm-hmm.
outskirts, and they kind of stay not necessarily fully isolated, but they stay on the brink between the community and the world outside of the community.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting to me that that role is an important one in the tribal culture, because that's the link for the culture, for the community. That's the link to the outside world. The shaman helps them to make connections with the outside world. And I really feel like that a lot of the folks that I know in this company of one culture are people who are in that kind of a role. It's like they're helping the community connect with a realm that's outside of the community.
Hmm.
And I see that a lot as well.
Yeah, I mean, I can just sort of see this in terms of a variety of contexts, not just the solopreneur, as you were saying, or it could be a freelancer in an organization. So you're a manager of a team, and one of them is a freelancer, and they like working alone. How do you manage that person in the team, right? And
Yeah.
give them their space, right? That they need, that they desire. That's why they're doing this, versus making sure they're included and they have that contact with the others as well, because it's needed and need to be part of the team. There are just so many different applications.
Yeah. The first job that I had out of college was in a sales force,
Hmm.
and it was in an open concept office. And it was for me the seventh level of hell, um,
Yes.
because it was really difficult for me to focus in that environment.
Hmm.
Um, and a lot of it was just that I'm kind of an absorber. And it's like there's a lot of energy going on in that room. And for me, being around all that energy and having to sort it all out was really, really difficult.
Hmm.
And so finally, when I got to the point of being promoted, the one request that I had was that I wanted to have the cubicle that was farthest away from everybody.
Yeah.
And because I couldn't have an office, they didn't have an office available for me, but I said I want to have the cubicle that is the in the farthest corner of the building, and is in that place where the accountants are working because they can be quiet. And when I did that, when I made that move, all of a sudden it became a lot more pleasant to work, and
Hmm.
it became a lot easier for me to actually get my work done effectively. What had happened before, when I was in the open concept office where I was in the boiler room, with all of the different
Hmm.
with all the different telemarketers, what would happen is that I wouldn't actually get my work done until everybody else had gone home.
Right.
And I would stay 2 or 3 hours afterwards and get all of my work done then, because I could actually concentrate then. So I was on
Hmm.
first name basis with the cleaning crew, you know. But that was what it took for me to be able to do the work. And I think, looking back on it, that, the fetish that we all had for open concept offices, it worked for some folks. It worked for those folks who, really get energized by the competition and the interaction and the buzz. And there are a certain segment of us that don't do well in that.
Hmm. Well, I think this is great because we're talking about, I mean, people keep talking about the new normal or post-pandemic world and how so much work is going to be done remotely and people will be more freelancers and solopreneurs. I mean, that's been going on for a while, even before the pandemic. But seeing how there are avenues for this to succeed and acknowledging this from corporations too, how
Yeah.
you can support people in these roles and realize that they are successful alone and they are independent and the autonomy is actually a good thing. It's
Yeah.
not like they're off shopping like everyone always was worried about when we first started remote work, right? It's like, oh no, they're going to be, watching soaps or out shopping. You're like,
Yeah.
no, they're actually creating and thinking and for the folks who thrive in this kind of environment. So I think that this is, um, a really important avenue to be going on and finding a way to support folks for doing that. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things I think I was very encouraging about the
Mm,
pandemic, was that we found for a certain segment of people that
hmm.
remote work was actually a preferable way for them
Right.
to deliver their best work.
Hmm.
I'm not saying it was for everybody,
Right.
certainly not for everybody, but there was a segment of people that actually performed better in that situation. And what we found was that we don't necessarily have to exclude that as an option anymore, just de facto. We can actually include that option in the mix and really tailor it to people who are actually able to thrive in that environment. I
Hmm.
think that's a very encouraging thing.
Yeah. Well, Franklin, tell us a little bit more about where your podcast is located and how people can reach you if they want to learn more about this.
Well, the best way to find anything about the podcast right now is on my website.
Hmm.
I haven't been able to get it on Apple Podcasts yet. They've got a backlog. And so I'm hoping that at some point it'll show up
Hmm.
in their feed. It is on Spotify. It's on Anchor.
Hmm.
It's on Google Podcasts and a few others. But the easiest way to find it is just on my website, which is franklintaggart.com. The latest couple of episodes have been really cool, and I'm getting ready to actually have an episode with you on it.
Hmm.
And that'll be released in the next few days, and I'm
Hmm.
excited about that one, in which we talk about assessments and how to use them and what they're for and what we can gain from them. That's going to be a great episode, by the way.
Oh, yeah, I think so.
And then the other thing that I would encourage people to do is that if you're interested in joining the Facebook group, it's just called Your Own Best Company.
Mhm.
And you can look me up on Facebook and join me there. And I also encourage people to connect with me on LinkedIn as well. Just
Good.
Franklin Taggart Coaching on LinkedIn.
Hmm. Excellent. Yeah, and do reach out because even when you are alone, you still need to be connected. So,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, excellent. Well, thank you. This has been extremely interesting and useful. Thanks so much for being a guest yet again on Reinventing Nerds. Yeah.
I loved it, Joanie. It's always good to talk with you.
Well, thanks. Um, and thanks to all our listeners. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. And we'll see you next time.